The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is set to meet with President Trump over at the White House later today. The president says he thinks there's a good chance for a ceasefire hostage deal this week. Indirect talks between Israel and Hamas were expected to resume in Doha, Qatar at any time. We're watching that as well. But the war certainly still rages. Palestinian officials say nearly 60 people were killed in Israel's latest strikes on Gaza. I want to go live right now to our senior White House reporter, Kevin Liptak. Kevin, what is President Trump hoping to accomplish in today's important meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister?
Yeah, and this will be Netanyahu's third visit to the White House since President Trump took office. That's the most of any foreign leader. And like his previous two visits, the situation in Gaza very much at the center of their discussions. President Trump very eager to bring about a ceasefire for hostages deal in the enclave. Certainly there does appear as if there's new momentum after those U.S. strikes on Iran last month. Those mediators in Qatar having what are called proximity talks, essentially passing messages back and forth between a mediator. President Trump is very eager to get this deal in place. He said yesterday that he thought one could be struck this week, although we should note that there are differences between the two sides that they are now trying to resolve. The truce under discussion would last 60 days. It would involve a phased release of the remaining hostages in Gaza, including the deceased having their bodies removed from the Gaza Strip. President Trump, I think, very eager to get this deal in place because he thinks it would unlock his broader goals for the Middle East, including this major step of normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Saudi leaders have said that can't happen while the war in Gaza is raging. So President Trump very eager to get this ceasefire in place.
All right, Kevin Liptak at the White House. Joining us now to discuss what's going on, the former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren. Ambassador, thanks so much for joining us. As you know, President Trump has publicly said he thinks a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas can get done this week. How realistic do you think that is?
Well, always good to be with you, Wolf. We hope it's realistic. We desperately hope it's realistic. At the end of the day, Hamas has to decide whether it's going to go along with the deal which the United States and Israel have agreed, which is for a prolonged ceasefire, release of some Palestinian prisoners from our jails, and of course the release of hostages. The question is how many hostages, how many living hostages, how many hostages who are no longer living. This all becomes part of the bargaining. But the big issue, Wolf, is always what happens after the ceasefire. Israel would like to retain the right to renew combat operations if Hamas continues to pose a threat. Hamas wants an end to the war and guarantees that Israel will not renew those operations. So it really comes down to that one issue. And whether it can be, how should we say, fudged, to say that at the end of the 2 months or 60 days of ceasefire, there will be further negotiations toward the ending the war entirely. And that's probably the best you can do. Whether this will be acceptable to Hamas remains to be seen.
As you know, Prime Minister Netanyahu says Israel won't budge on its demand that Hamas eventually relinquish control of Gaza. Could that end up being a deal breaker?
It could. And it has repeatedly in the past. But here, the Prime Minister is coming to this meeting now much strengthened by Israel's military victory in Iran. The President is coming into this meeting much strengthened by America's victory over Iran. And that could perhaps lend, go more to the fact that both leaders could show a certain amount of flexibility. Clearly, the president wants this deal. He wants the deal for many reasons, but moreover because he wants peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and the Saudis will not negotiate with Israel as long as the Israeli army is fighting in Gaza. So he wants to end that, the president. He sees openings also for possible peace arrangements between Israel and Lebanon, Israel and Syria, peace breaking out to the entire Middle East if this agreement with Hamas can be reached. The president could put pressure on the prime minister, but can also give enticements, the carrots, if you will. One of them would be keeping a military option on the table vis-a-vis Iran if Iran tries to rebuild some of those destroyed or obliterated nuclear facilities. A very difficult decision given the depth of American opposition of the public to further American military involvement in Iran. And also the possible sale, Wolf, of B-2 strategic bombers to Israel. This is an issue I've been working on for many years, trying to convince multiple administrations to either sell us a B-2 or lease us a B-2. Have not made much headway there, but now it's being discussed in a bipartisan bill in Congress. Now, that would be a tremendous incentive to the Prime Minister, and enable him to show toward the Israeli public much more flexibility on the ceasefire in Gaza issue.
Would that include those bunker bombs that so far have been denied to Israel?
Well, the plane itself is of little use without the equipment that comes with it. It's not exactly the equivalent to, say, leather seating. It's actually part and parcel of this weapons system. It's a system. It's the bomber and the bomb it carries. And certainly, and that would send an unequivocal message to the Iranians, but also give the Israeli public a tremendous amount of security, which we didn't have in the past, which is why I was seeking that deal for so many years. And I think it would be a game changer. And I would certainly welcome such a move and applaud the Republican and Democratic congressmen who are moving this bill forward.
The former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren. Ambassador, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Will.
Well, the Israeli Prime Minister is in Washington today to meet with President Trump to discuss the latest ceasefire proposal. Just before boarding his flight to the US on Sunday, Netanyahu said Trump, quote, can help move us closer to an agreement. Meantime, an Israeli source tells CNN that indirect talks between Israel and Hamas in Qatar will be resuming shortly. Let's get you CNN's Jeremy Diamond, who is in Tel Aviv. Donald Trump certainly appears optimistic about making progress towards a deal. So what more are we hearing at this point about where these talks stand and how close they might be to some sort of deal?
Well, Becky, let's quickly recap what's happened over the last few days. I mean, we've seen Hamas now deliver what they characterize as a positive response to that latest ceasefire proposal, which Israel had accepted following the United States submitting that proposal. Although they did include several amendments, some changes to the language that they would like to see. The Israeli Prime Minister called those changes unacceptable, but nonetheless, he agreed to send a delegation of Israeli negotiators to Doha in order to begin those proximity talks, which is usually the last stage of negotiations, in order to iron out all of the details and get over any last-minute obstacles. Those negotiations began yesterday. They are indeed continuing today as well. And now the question is whether or not they can overcome the remaining gaps that do exist. And a lot of that may depend on how the Israeli Prime Minister's meetings with President Trump go, because there's no question President Trump wants this ceasefire deal to happen, and he also believes that it will ultimately lead to an end of the war in Gaza. Listen to the president yesterday.
I think we're close to a deal on Gaza. We could have it this week. I think there's a good chance we have a deal with Hamas during the coming week, pertaining to quite a few of the hostages. Yeah. You know, we've gotten a lot of the hostages out, but pertaining to the remaining hostages, quite a few of them will be coming out. We think we'll have that done this week.
And of course, Becky, we know that a number of changes had been made to this latest ceasefire proposal in order to try and bridge the gap with Hamas, including those stronger assurances from the United States that they would keep Israel at the negotiating table in order to really, in earnest, try and end this war in Gaza over the course of this 60-day truce, or even perhaps beyond it if that is necessary. We also heard on social media from Bishara Bahba, who is a Palestinian-American businessman, a supporter of President Trump's, who's been dispatched in Doha for some time now, trying to bridge the gap here, communicating directly with Hamas. He said that in his view, the amendments that Hamas has requested will not prevent reaching a ceasefire agreement. But again, there are a number of issues that still need to be discussed. And while there certainly is still a lot of momentum behind this, and certainly a lot of willpower from the United States in order to get this across the finish line, it remains to be seen whether the two sides can indeed get there. Becky?
Jeremy, thank you.